Krishnamurti was referring to when at the end of his life somebody asked him, do you have a final secret teaching for us? And he said, yes, I do have one final teaching for you. And of course everyone was on the edge of their chairs waiting for this marvelous new teaching, and he simply said, I don't mind what happens. He was speaking of this understanding. What he was saying was, my experience has lost its capacity to veil my own being and its innate peace and happiness, and therefore my peace and happiness is no longer invested in experience, so I don't mind what happens. My peace is prior to experience, not dependent upon experience. Consciousness is like the sun. When the sun first appeared, the sun didn't, at some point in its evolution, begin to illuminate itself. The sun's nature is illumination. It illuminates itself from the very beginning, because that's what it is. It is it is illumination, it is shining, it is by nature self-illuminating. Consciousness is like that. Consciousness is knowledge of itself, is not a sign of the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness, by definition, is self-knowing, or self-luminous, or self-aware. And its knowledge of itself is not a knowledge of induality. It's not, when consciousness knows itself, that knowledge does not take place in subject-object relationship. It is the only experience there is, the only experience there is, in which the subject of experience and the object of experience are the same. In other words, there is no subject or object of experience in consciousness's knowledge of itself.
I understand. I guess what I'm getting at is, how does consciousness begin the game?
It begins to vibrate within itself, and this vibration gives its otherwise formless being a form. And having a form, it begins to limit itself in exactly the same way that when you have a dream at night, your mind is a field of infinite potential in which all possible dreams lie unmanifest. But your own mind assumes the form of one of those dreams, and by doing so immediately limits itself. And then,
but who's limiting who? Is
consciousness is limiting itself, because there is nothing in consciousness other than consciousness with which consciousness could be limited. Consciousness freely assumes the form of the finite mind in order to bring what lies in potential within it into manifestation.
But how, in your view, does it get lost in that?
That is the price consciousness pays for manifestation. Just as when you have a dream at night, your own mind imagines the dreamed world within itself, and simultaneously forgets or overlooks that it is dreaming. That is the price your mind pays for dreaming that you are walking on the streets of Paris. You have forgotten that you are dreaming, and that forgetting of the nature of your own mind enables your mind to assume the streets of Paris. But you cannot view the streets of Paris directly from your own mind asleep in San Jose. You have to enter into your own dream. Your own mind has to localize itself in its own dream as the dreamed character, the separate subject of experience, from whose perspective the dreamed world is known. In other words, your own mind divides itself into a subject, the dreamed character, and an object, the dreamed world. This subject-object relationship seems to be true from the perspective of the separate subject of experience in the dream. But when you wake up, you realize, no, experience was not divided into a subject and an object, into mind and matter. It was all the activity of my own infinite, indivisible mind. So just consider the possibility that, unlike your own mind, which localizes itself as a single dream character in the dream, from whose perspective the dreamed world is known, that the one mind, infinite consciousness, imagines the universe within itself. The universe, in other words, is the activity or imagination of consciousness. But it has to overlook itself. Why? Because the infinite cannot know the finite. The infinite can only know the infinite. Consciousness can only know itself. If it wants to know a world, it has to overlook the knowing of its own being. It has to consent to localize itself in the form of each of our minds, from whose perspective consciousness views its own activity as the outside world. In other words, just as the price you pay for enjoying dreaming that you're in Paris is the forgetting or the overlooking of the nature of your own mind. Likewise, the price consciousness pays for realizing or manifesting its infinite potential in the form of the world is the forgetting or overlooking of itself. And this forgetting or overlooking of itself and its innate peace and happiness it leaves a trace in each of our minds, and that trace is called suffering. Suffering is the price God pays for manifestation. And that is why when we suffer, we are always longing for one thing alone, happiness. What is happiness? The knowing of our own being. So this as consciousness contracts or localizes itself in the form of the finite mind, it limits itself, and this limited self that each of us seems to be, there's one thing alone that everybody seeks. Not just those of us interested in non-duality, but all 7 billion of us seek one thing alone. It's happiness, which means we seek to be divested of the limitations of the separate self and return to our origin or source. The search for enlightenment is simply a rebranding of the common search for happiness. Whether we are searching for happiness or enlightenment, it is the same thing. All anybody ever seeks is to be divested of the limitations that they seem to acquire from experience, and as a result, for their true nature of happiness to shine.